Hi, and welcome to the show. You're watching In the Studio. I'm your host, Lynn Weaver. The program is brought to you by Davis Media Access and is broadcast on Davis Community Television, that's Comcast Channel 15 and AT&T UVerse 99. We're also online at dctv.davismedia.org, so log on and enjoy all of our other TV programs. Today, our topic is the UC Davis Good Life Garden, a garden you can eat. How neat is that? And to talk about it, I have two very special guests. Christina Reyes, the UC Davis landscaping architect and the designer of the garden. Welcome.
Thank you.
And Pat Stoffel, the gardener specialist, UC Davis garden specialist, who is take care of the plants of the garden and make sure that the garden is a sustainable and successful and beautiful garden all year round. Thank you so much for being here, and welcome again to Davis Community Television.
Thanks for having us.
Now, I'm going to ask Christina, tell us a little bit how it all started and what got you involved into the garden, and also why does UC Davis want an edible garden? Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Sure.
Thank you.
It started during the design process for the Robert Mondavi Institute, and the construction was in 2008, but leading up to that, there were a lot of discussions about what type of landscape there should be in the courtyard that was forming between the buildings. And one of the original concepts was an herb garden. And as discussions on campus heated up about what that should be, it started to seem like there was a really great opportunity there for community engagement. And the conversation proceeded until we were talking about an edible garden in that space. And part of the reason for that is that with the academic departments in the surrounding buildings, food science and technology and viticulture and enology, it seemed like there would be a really good link there between the emphasis of good food and the growing of good healthy food and a healthy lifestyle, so that UC Davis would be a perfect place to demonstrate that, with the adjacency to the food science department, again even a better benefit, and viticulture and enology, as well as the fact that there's a 13-acre teaching vineyard that was being developed at the same time the buildings were being built.
Yes.
And so all of those things kind of came together to make this be the right place for such a venture, and a great spot for community engagement.
It must have been a challenge, although you have many years of experience as a landscaping architect, but it would seem to me that make something that you can eat and is also very beautiful and sustainable must have been quite a challenge, as I said. And we're going to talk a little more about it, especially with Pat, about how to do that. Now, Pat, tell us how you got involved. You're a UC Davis garden specialist, and you're involved in many projects. However, was this a one of a kind for you?
Yes, I've worked for UC Davis for 13 years now, and in various locations. And when this opportunity first arose, I was chicken. Didn't want to do it. I don't know enough. But as time went by, the young woman who did take this spot, she moved on. And so my supervisor very nicely asked me to take the position. And I have never regretted it since. It's probably been the greatest learning experience that I've had in many, many years. And I get a lot of strokes.
Yes, and I've heard that you're a legend among the gardeners, not just because of your wonderful skills, but also because of your creativity and your very hard work. So thank you for giving us this garden, which is beautiful. It's one of my favorite, if not the favorite garden and I go to it very often, especially when I'm a little tense and I want to see beauty and all the tasty produce that you do there.
That's nice to hear, because that kind of feedback makes me feel like I'm doing something worthwhile. And not
Yes,
just,
yes,
you know.
and that is wonderful. And since I've discovered this garden, I want other people to discover it, and that brings us to ask you, where is it located? Could you tell us this?
It's within the courtyard that's formed between the Robert Mondavi Institute and the winery and brewery facility that's to the south of that, which is on the south edge of the campus on Old Davis Road, right off the main UC Davis exit
Yes.
off of Highway 80.
Yes, and it is very close to the Mondavi Performance Center.
Absolutely.
And just across the street. And it's very easy to see the buildings, the Food and Wine Institute, because it has this stucco,
Right.
reddish stucco
Terracotta
tone.
colors, yes.
Yes.
So you can
And
see it.
they're the first buildings you see when you're coming on campus from that.
That's correct, from the highway as
And
well.
from the highway as well, yes.
And also, how big is this garden? Do you know approximately? Because you own, UC Davis owns a lot of land.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
This garden, the Good Life Garden itself is about an acre, if you include the lands around the winery brewery facility, maybe closer to 2 acres, would you say?
Yeah, 2 acres.
But the garden area itself, the planted area, I think is about a quarter
Quarter of an
acre.
acre.
Would you
Yeah.
agree with that?
Yes.
I think
It's very
that's about
intense
right.
planting, but because it's small area.
Yeah.
Small
consider it.
area, but all the more beautiful because it all in the proximity of all the plantings. Is this garden open to the public?
Sure.
Absolutely. All
That's
the time.
great.
Yeah.
That's great. And it's also a teaching and a demo garden, isn't it, for the community?
Yes, more than anything, it's a demonstration of what can be grown and different ways of using the fruit and vegetables in your landscape to not
Yeah.
just flowers and shrubs.
That's
that
right.
you can go out and eat it too.
And feed
Right.
so let's take a look. I have a few photos for you. So let's take a look, and perhaps if you feel like commenting, please do.
Okay.
All right. So let's take a look. So this is a view of the garden, and it's a different season. It's not today.
Right. That was,
I believe that was the fall.
Yes.
Yes.
and it looks like fall of probably a few years ago.
A few years ago?
Yeah.
No, it was about a couple of years ago.
Couple of years ago.
Yes, because it has grown,
Yes.
especially
yes.
the trees, yes. And the building in the back, and there's another, you notice how there's a little bit of a courtyard there where people can sit.
Absolutely.
And it's just beautifully landscaped.
Thank you. Yeah.
And there's another view of the garden. Anything that strikes you here?
Well, in this shot in particular, if you go out to the garden today, you'll see that's a view from the section of the garden that we have identified as the wine aroma garden.
Yes.
That's where the majority of our fruit trees are. And again, that relationship was developed again because so many fruit flavors are identified in wine tasting that seemed like a good place in the garden to really concentrate our fruit trees. And that's actually what you're seeing, but a lot of the trees are not in the shot or are really small when this picture was taken.
And also, I believe there are a lot of olive trees surrounding the garden. Yes.
There's a
And
grove,
do you
yes.
do you
Full-grown.
harvest those olive trees?
No, we do not.
No.
It's too difficult. Where they are located, it's more just part of that whole ambiance of fruit and vegetables. And of
Yes.
course, olives has been such a big thing at UC Davis for so long.
Oh, yes, of
How
course.
could you not have olives in
Yes.
the Good
Yeah.
Life Garden?
Yes.
And the Robert Mondavi Institute also now houses the UC Davis Olive Center, so it's especially appropriate to have the olive grove in that location.
And what I wanted you to notice here is that this beautiful diagram is also a demo and teaching tool, and you learn a lot about the species, like it's about chili and okra, and for just about every vegetable there is an explanation of its origin and where to plant and how to plant. I think it's just very beautiful.
Yeah.
And there, one thing that struck me is those blue stakes. What are they?
So color was a really important consideration in this garden. And when I was asked to do the design work for it, one of the things I was asked to do was to make sure it looked beautiful as much of the time as possible, which isn't always easy in a seasonal edible garden.
Yes.
And one of the other challenges, but also big opportunities here, are the colors of the buildings. They're so dramatic,
yes.
And you can't help but notice the colors when you're in that space. That it really affects how you look at the landscape and the colors and textures of the plant materials that you use.
Yes.
If you fail to take into account the colors of the buildings, then you again you could either be missing an opportunity or doing something that would look quite uncomfortable.
Striking, maybe.
Or striking, in a good way or a bad way.
Yeah.
And so the blue stakes, what I noticed is that the garden really calls for hot colored plants.
Yes.
But with elements, bringing in elements of complementary colors, blues and purples.
Yes.
While avoiding pastels to a certain
Right.
extent. Pinks and things like that don't
Right.
go that well with terracotta,
Yes.
at least in my opinion.
Yes.
And so what we needed when we first planted the summer garden was something a little bold and to make a statement, especially also because tomato plants aren't the most beautiful
No.
in form or texture.
And they're very common in this area, too.
But they make up for it in other ways.
They do, absolutely. But when I was thinking about a way of celebrating those tomato plants, even though they don't look that beautiful, it was.
Now, this is an example of what sweet pea flowers look like, and this is to illustrate that edible vegetable can also be very beautiful in terms of how they look. And Pat, wouldn't you agree with this?
Definitely,
Yes. That's nice. Well, one thing, and this is of course an illustration of where some of the crop goes to produce a caprese salad, which is a real treat. Now, Pat was so kind. She brought into the studio a sample of the harvest here, and would you tell us about them?
Sure.
Explain a little bit. But by the way, notice how beautiful they are in terms of texture and color. I could almost draw them and paint them.
If I was an artist, I'd go, huh? But I particularly picked ones, vegetables that we don't normally see, because we grow so many of the things in our garden that is not your average vegetable, though it's becoming more popular in the Whole Food stores and stuff like
markets.
that.
Yes.
Farmers markets.
In the
that you see
gourmet
more
market.
You wouldn't
Exactly.
see these in the
Yes.
grocery
But you won't
store.
see, Hungarian hot wax peppers.
Is that what they are?
Yes, and I have never tasted them because I'm not too fond of heat. But I understand they're quite hot.
They look very
And this
pretty.
is the Rosa Bianca eggplant. I just thought it's just so beautiful.
Rosa Bianca, the white
Yes.
rose. Yeah.
And this in particular is an Armenian cucumber, as opposed to our.
Suzuki Midori, I
There
believe.
you go. Leave that to the architect. And
Can you
this
pickle
one.
it? Can you pickle that?
Yes, sure.
Yes, yes.
And this is what they call a Turkish eggplant, but I've decided to call it a turban instead, because I believe it was kind of morally incorrect to use a Turkish name when they were saying, oh, it looked like a turban. Well, then just call it a turban. Don't call it Turkish. It wasn't grown in Turkey,
Well, that's very interesting.
but they're very tasty. I like them a lot.
And
it's a beautiful plant too. They look like ornaments hanging
Yes.
from the eggplant.
yes, it is. And what does it taste like? Have you tasted it?
Yes, unfortunately for my taste, I don't see much difference in the different varieties of eggplant. I
Yes.
think someone who is really into eggplant might.
Yes.
But I find them all very, tasty. The younger, the better, actually.
Yes.
And
Well, they're really beautiful, and the way you arrange them are, very pleasing to the eye. Now, and that brings us to another question that I have for both of you. Now, how often do you harvest this garden? Because this, as a reminder, this is an organic garden, and it's a year-round sustainable garden. So you've got 4 seasons, and no.
We only do 2 seasons.
2 seasons.
Yes.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
And which are?
Well, the fall season, which goes through the winter,
And
Yeah.
early
then
spring
then
even.
the early spring goes through the summer.
Oh, I see. I see. And so you harvest twice a year?
Oh no,
No.
I harvest every week because the garden is very small.
Yes.
There is not enough that I could harvest a whole massive amount. So it's.
I wish
almost
my
unable-
garden was so.
Yeah.
Well,
so
see, and that's the
producing.
point, though, in a demonstration garden of this sort. This is for your backyard.
Yes.
This is something that
Yeah.
people can use.
Yes.
On a daily basis. Go out and have a few cucumbers. Get this and that. You're not looking to, do some canning and preserving. If you want to do that, then go to the farmer's market or
That's
have
right.
have an acre
Right,
of land
that's
all on your own.
Right.
But as your own backyard that you can harvest every day,
Yeah.
and have something to eat. It's fresh, and that's the perfect
Well, the nice
situation.
thing about it being a demonstration garden too is that we can choose to let certain plants bolt.
Yes.
And at that point they're not very edible
Right.
or
Yes.
not edible at all.
Yes.
But you get the benefit of beautiful flower, seeing what vegetables look like when when you let them go to flower. The artichokes
Right.
have a wonderful flower.
Exactly.
And so when leeks bloom, it's fantastic and amazing. And so that's the other nice thing about not having the pressure to have to harvest at any particular time or the need for a large amount of food to provide
Yes.
for a restaurant or something like that, is that we can really utilize the demonstration
Yeah.
purpose of the garden to
Yeah.
the fullest extent.
Yeah.
And then people can see the whole process of the plant.
That's
whatever
right.
that is.
And that is so interesting, especially for the Victory Garden people, and that's very nice. But that brings us to another question. And normally, a landscaping architect's job is pretty much over once you've designed the garden, but it sounds to me as though you're still very much involved in this, and you work with Pat together. Now, what can you describe what some of your interventions are to the garden?
Yeah.
Yes?
Well, every season, and which is now 2 seasons in the year, we
Yes.
did at one
Yes.
time have a separate spring season, but we've decided to go to the 2-season method. I prepare a planting plan for the garden, meet with Pat, and we talk about what's worked and what hasn't worked, where there are gaps forming in the landscape,
Right.
because there's a pretty well-developed structure in the garden of perennial
Yes.
plants.
Yes.
So the entire garden is not edible.
Right.
Some of the structure is edible, they're herbs and things like that. But
Yes.
but oftentimes, we might have issues in one section of the garden. I did want to make one correction: the garden isn't certified organic, but it is pesticide free.
Right. It is
And so, as a result, though, you do have some things that creep up.
Well, you often hear with no pesticide gardens that of companion gardening. Could you tell us what it is, Pat?
Well, it's more or less each plant. Mother Nature is pretty smart,
Yeah, very
She's
smart.
got it all together. They attract different insects for good purposes, usually for pollinating. And then, of course, you have the ones that get out of control, and then they become a problem. So what Mother Nature has done is if you listen to her and how she's created things, you put the plants that bring in the insects that will lower the other insects. that are going to get out of control. And it's very hard as a human being to allow Mother Nature to do her thing without us getting our hands in there and going, because I don't want it, I don't want that bug. You know.
Yeah.
Most of the times, if the conditions are correct, you know, and that's all how we work in trying to learn about the agricultural world, and not just how we want it to look, but how it is.
Yes.
And if we let it all work together, there's not that much work for us to do.
Except that you have to be very knowledgeable about what to do, and scientifically so, because of course it must be very complex at times, and you have to juggle all these factors: color, season, companion planting. You know, it sounds like it requires a lot of experience and a lot of knowledge. Wouldn't you say, Pat?
Definitely takes observation,
Yes.
more than anything, is seeing what is happening and being able to say, I can change this by just tweaking an area. I can't even describe it, but it's being very observant.
Yes.
And trying to, and that's not always easy, because we only have 2 eyes, and we want to go to certain areas, you know, and all of a sudden we miss something. So you kind of remember that, oh, last year this didn't happen, or last year this happened, so I should really look in that area again. And so it's just constant going over and that experience of, and maintaining and retaining, retaining it.
Yes. Well, that's very interesting. Now, do you plant from seeds exclusively?
No, not exclusively.
Not
some
exclusively.
seeds and some plants.
And some plants, yes.
Yeah.
That's an incredible. Is there anything that I haven't asked that you would like to add for our community to know about the garden?
Well, it is open. We do not, how would I say this? Because I take care of it so much, and I do the harvesting. And I do like to share the produce that we have, but it's a limited amount that I can do. And unfortunately, people sometimes feel that because it's a, quote, public garden, that it's their right to come in and harvest it, and it is not.
Well, and this is very interesting, yes, because I've been myself tempted. Oh, look at that tomato. Maybe I could just, nobody will notice if I pick it.
Yeah.
But where does the produce go?
At one time, early on in the garden's history, there was, we had worked out a plan with Sodexo that runs the campus restaurant.
Oh, yes.
And they were purchasing some of the produce from the garden to use in the restaurant. But the volume of produce it's not a production garden. It wasn't enough. And because of the garden's public nature,
yes,
and some of the campus environmental health and safety issues about it being open and not being able to control, people's pets and things like that coming in and out of the garden.
Yes.
There were some issues.
Sanitary.
And so following some of those campus regulations about that, the produce can sometimes be used for very limited student groups and things like that, so events and things, but within the confines of environmental health and safety regulations and things like that.
Yes. So ultimately, the produce is just distributed among the staff, or from the garden, or friends maybe.
Some I have presently I have 2 young student assistants,
interns,
and they have free reign to help themselves to the.
Oh, that's wonderful.
They work
they
hard,
deserve
so
it.
Yes, exactly.
They deserve it.
Yeah.
And also, you don't want the garden to be totally depleted either.
No, correct. Yes, and people tend not to know how to harvest
yeah.
things.
Well,
too.
and you have to harvest things oftentimes right when they're at the peak of looking their best,
Yeah.
in order for them to also taste their best. And that was, as a designer, difficult for me in the first year when we were trying to do that.
Yeah.
It was a little heartbreaking. Oh gosh, that is this week it looks its best, and now it's gone. And so
Yes.
that was
And so
a
is
challenge.
life. Yes. But one thing is you can go to the website, and that I believe is the Good Life Garden at ucdavis.edu, or perhaps
I believe so. If you Google,
if you Google the Good Life Garden. And one thing that I was interested in when I went on your website was that you actually UC Davis can rent the space. Is that correct? And this is interesting because it seems like it's a lovely place for a reception or for a reunion of some kind, or just a place where you can cater an event.
And that's part of the reason there's a lot of open area. There's
Right.
lawn and a rather large meadow area, and that was the reason for that, is so that events could be staged there, and
And the
gatherings.
university does stage several. I think during conferences sometimes they'll have outdoor receptions there, which is very nice. Well, I can't tell you how much I appreciate the work that you do for the garden, and for coming here to talk about it. I already feel that I've learned so much about it. And also, I forgot to tell you that on your website, they have some scrumptious recipes of things that you can do with the crops that you are growing, and that's also an inspiration for me. I'm not a very good cook, so I need a recipe all the time. So I just wanted to thank you so much for coming over and joining us here in the studio. I enjoyed this conversation very much. So Pat Stoffel, the garden specialist at UC Davis, who takes care of the Good Life Garden, and Christina Reyes, the UC Davis architect who designed the garden.
Landscape architect, yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you, all of you, for watching. You can watch these programs again on our website, dctv.davismedia.org. And while you're there, you can check some of our other programs. Thanks again for watching. You've been watching In the Studio. I'm your host, Lynn Weaver. See you next time.